In this lecture, the professor explains the negative, damaging effects of mining for shale oil. He explains his reasoning through two examples of the lasting damage this process has. In the first example, he outlines how the process by which shale oil is combusted is bad for the environment. When it's combusted, it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This carbon dioxide is produced at a quicker rate than the trees, water, and ground can reabsorb it, meaning it just builds up in the atmosphere. This is one factor that is leading to what we know of as global warming. The second example has to do with the process by which 3 liters of fresh water are used to produce 1 liter of shale oil. While being a large amount of fresh water, this water is also contaminated and undrinkable, or left underground where it seeps into other water sources and contaminates those. So, the professor uses these examples to highlight the negative effects of shale oil mining. During this lecture, the professor describes how there are actually 2 types of slumps, traditional and rotational. He describes these 2 types of slumps through a few examples. Although a slump is when a rock moves along a horizontal plane down a slope, that movement can occur in 2 different ways. The first, a traditional slump, is when a landmass moves along a plane where there are usually faults or joints. In the second type of slump, rotational, the slump moves along a curved surface. When this happens, it causes the slump to rotate backward, and thus the slope becomes less steep as the slump lifts up, and becomes more parallel with the earth. Therefore, depending upon the type of slope that a slump is descending, the professor explains that there are 2 different types of slumps with slightly varying characteristics. In the lecture, the professor explains the differences between 2 of the main types of sand dunes, crescentric and parabolic. He illustrates the main differences through a detailed description of both dunes, focusing on how their shapes are different. The first difference, he explains, has to do with the dune's slip faces. While all dunes are created by a single directional wind, the sand can land in 2 different shapes, which alter their slip face. In a crescentric dune, the shape is a crescent, and its slip face is on its onward side. In a parabolic dune, the slip face is on a convex side, which is the inward side of the dune. The second difference he explains has to do with vegetation. To form a parabolic dune requires that part of the dune be covered in vegetation, anchoring part of the structure and creating the parabolic shape. Crescentric dunes, on the other hand, don't have any vegetation and so form the uniquely different shape. So, the 2 main types of dunes are mostly identifiable by their shape, aided by the vegetation in the area.
The lecture is about 2 types of coadaptation. The first type of coadaptation is mutualism. Take hummingbirds and flowers as an example. Flowers adapt themselves to appeal to hummingbirds, so that hummingbirds are able to get their pollen easily. The benefit of this relationship is that while the hummingbird gets food, the plant's pollen is distributed. Okay, the second type of coadaptation is mimicry. For example, the king snake has adapted a color pattern that resembles the coral snake. Through this adaptation, predators don't seem to bother the king snake. Finally, the professor mentions that coadaptation could lead to coextinction. For instance, the extinction of the red ant could lead to the extinction of the large blue butterfly since they rely on each other.
During the lecture, the professor explains the differences between 2 types of canyons, plateau and slot. He describes the 2 different canyons in order to help describe the physical differences between how they look and how they are formed. The first type of canyon, a plateau canyon, is formed by slow, winding rivers that continuously cross a plateau and erode the walls, creating a wide canyon with a large opening to the sky. The second type of canyon, a slot canyon, is formed not by rivers but by flash floods. When there are heavy rains that quickly wash over soft sandstone and limestone, the water cuts a quick, narrow crevice through the ground. This results in a deep, narrow canyon with only small openings to the sky. Therefore, besides both being called canyons, the professor shows how these two types are very different in both their shape and how they are formed by nature. In this lecture, the professor describes the difference between a slough avalanche and a slab avalanche. He offers examples of the two types of avalanches to help better demonstrate the difference between the two types. In the first example of a slough avalanche, he explains that this happens when a weak layer of snowpack falls on top of a harder, more slippery layer of snow. The loose layer then loses its grip on the hard snow and causes a slide that is considered less dangerous and produces few fatalities. Second, he explained how a slab avalanche was different. A slab avalanche occurs when a hard, compressed layer then covers a weak layer of snow. With a weak layer between two harder layers of snow, the top layer, or slab, slides along the fluffy layer in the middle. Once the slab slides, it then breaks into smaller blocks that continually break up along the way, also dragging the soft middle layer down the mountain. So slab avalanches are considered more dangerous and there are often more fatalities.